So we're diving into the Loch Ness Monster, huh? I gotta say, I'm kind of hooked already.
Yeah, it's one of those mysteries that just grabs you, doesn't it?
It's got it all. Eyewitness accounts, blurry photos, sonar readings, even some theories that are, well, let's just say creative.
And that's what makes this more than just a monster hunt. It's about how we try to explain the unexplained, how we use everything from ancient folklore to, like you said, some really out there ideas to make sense of things we don't understand.
So where do we even begin with a legend like this? I mean, the earliest mention of something strange in Loch Ness goes all the way back to the 7th century, right? St. Columba and a water beast.
That's our starting point, yeah. But even there, we're already wading into layers of myth and storytelling.
Like how much of that account is rooted in actual events versus, good old-fashioned embellishment?
Exactly. This account wasn't even written down until centuries after it supposedly happened. So you got to wonder, was it more about making St. Columbus seem even more impressive than, documenting a real creature?
Okay, so right from the start, we're questioning what's real and what's legend. But these stories stayed pretty local for centuries. What was it about the 1930s that suddenly put Nessie in the spotlight?
Well, for one thing, there was a new road built along the loch, making it way more accessible to tourists. More tourists, more eyes on the water.
More people seeing things,
Yeah.
or thinking they're seeing things.
Exactly. And 1933 was a big year for sightings, like a whole bunch of them, each one seemingly more dramatic than the last.
I guess everyone loves a good monster story, right?
Hmm.
But there was one particular account that really seemed to stick, the one that gave us this image of Nessie as a monster.
Yeah, Aldi McKay's sighting. It was even published in the local paper, the Inverness Courier.
See, it's getting legit.
Well, her description wasn't all that detailed, actually, but what's interesting is the word the editor used, monster.
Wow, I never thought about that. It's like the power of that one word really shaped how people imagined Nessie from that moment on.
And as more and more people started sending in their own stories to the paper, the monster started taking on even more forms, giant fish, sea serpents.
It's like everyone was trying to one-up each other with their sightings.
It makes you wonder how much of it was influenced by that first article. Once the idea of a monster was out there, everyone started seeing monsters, even if it was just a log or something.
Power of suggestion. It's pretty wild how our brains work, huh?
We can't help but look for patterns, try to make sense of things, even if it means seeing things that aren't really there.
Right. A shadow becomes a giant fin. A ripple of water is like the monster diving down.
And it wasn't just words and imagination fueling the fire. This is also when photography enters the scene, right? And that changed everything about how we view evidence, even if that evidence is, shall we say, open to interpretation.
You're talking about Hugh Gray's photo, right?
Correct.
1933. That's like the OG blurry Nessie pic. But seriously, what can we really learn from these early photographs besides the fact that cameras back then weren't exactly known for their underwater clarity?
It's easy to dismiss them now, but put yourself back then. The monster talk was everywhere, and then, boom, these pictures surface. Grainy as they were, they made it all seem real, and that sparked a whole new obsession. Could we capture something even clearer, something undeniable?
And that's when things get really interesting, right? I mean, we're not just talking about casual sightings anymore. It's like the world decided to get serious about finding this monster.
Yeah, the mid-20th century was really when these organized searches took off. Like, okay, enough with the blurry photos, let's get some real answers.
Right, so we're talking teams of scientists, specialized equipment. What did those early expeditions actually look like?
Well, some of them were surprisingly low-tech.
Low tech.
Yeah. Like in 1934, this wealthy businessman, Edward Mountain, he hired 20 guys, just regular dudes, to watch the loch for 5 weeks straight.
5 weeks.
Yeah.
Staring at water.
That's right. Binoculars, cameras, you name it, they were determined.
Talk about dedication. So did they find anything? 20 pairs of eyes, you'd think they'd spot something.
They took a few photos, nothing special. Apparently there was some film footage too, but get this, it's lost.
No way. Lost. That's almost too perfect, isn't it? A lost Nessie film.
Right. It's like something out of a movie. But anyway, around the same time, people started experimenting with sonar, and not just for navigation.
Ah, right. Using sound to see
Hey.
underwater.
Yeah.
So instead of relying on our often unreliable eyes.
Exactly. Sonar sends out sound waves, and by measuring how those waves bounce back, you can create a kind of like an audio map of what's down there.
Okay, so what did those early sonar experiments tell us about the loch?
Well, in 1954, there was this fishing boat, and they picked up this large object on their sonar, It seemed to be moving right alongside them, but the technology back then, it wasn't great.
So more mystery. Just a blip on a screen, no way to know for sure what it was.
Yep. But it definitely got people thinking. And in the late 60s, there was this study where they used sonar to create what they called an acoustic net across the loch.
An acoustic net. Sounds intense.
The idea was to catch any large moving objects that passed through it. And they got multiple hits. Some of them they figured out were just fish, but others, they moved way too fast, too erratically.
Keeping the dream alive. But how reliable even are these sonar readings, really? I mean, could they tell the difference between, say, a really big fish and, I don't know, a plesiosaur?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Sonar has its limitations. The quality of the reading, it depends on a lot of things: water conditions, the type of sonar you're using, even the experience of the person operating it.
So a blurry shape on a sonar screen could be pretty much anything.
Exactly. And that's where things get really tricky because, we tend to see what we want to see, right?
Especially when it comes to mysterious creatures. You're talking about Robert Rines, right? The
Ah.
guy who went all in on sonar and underwater cameras.
Yeah, Ryan's led several expeditions in the 70s and 80s, and he was convinced, absolutely convinced, that he'd found something big in Loch Ness.
Rines was the one who even gave Nessie that scientific name, right? Nessiteress. What was it again?
Nessiterus rhombopteryx.
Right. Based on those murky photos from his 1972 expedition, he even thought he saw a diamond-shaped fin, hence the name. Did the scientific community buy it? A new species of giant water monster.
Not so much. Those images were debated like crazy. A lot of people said they were just rocks or air bubbles, nothing unusual. Plus, there was the whole thing where people realized Nessiterus rhombopteryx is an anagram for Monster Hoax by Sir Peter S.
Ouch. Okay, maybe a little on the nose with that one, but hey, I guess that's science for you, right? Always questioning, always testing the evidence. Did Rines ever find that smoking gun photo?
He kept searching for decades. Always believed he was close, always on the verge of a breakthrough. But as intriguing as some of his images were, none of them were clear enough to convince the skeptics.
So the mystery lived on. But they weren't just using cameras and sonar. Then came the 1980s and Operation Deep Scan, this huge effort to basically blanket the loch with advanced sonar. How is that different from what came before?
Well, Operation Deep Scan involved 20 sonar devices, all strategically placed to create this super detailed, three-dimensional image of the loch. It was like they were combing through it with a fine-tooth comb, hoping to catch Nessie, taking a nap or something.
Did they find her napping?
They did detect this large moving object, something that, based on its size, seemed like it couldn't be a fish or anything else known to live in the loch. But like so many other leads, it just vanished before they could get a clear visual.
Always one step ahead. But it's like you said, this back and forth between hope and disappointment. That's part of the whole Loch Ness Monster experience, isn't it?
It's what keeps us coming back for more. Our brains just can't resist a good mystery.
Speaking of mysteries, let's talk about the BBC's massive sonar survey in 2003. This was supposed to be the be-all, end-all, right? Hundreds of sonar beams, the latest technology, the search that would finally put the Nessie debate to rest.
Yeah, that was the goal anyway. They went all out. And their conclusion, after analyzing all that data, they said there was no evidence of any large, unknown creature living in Loch Ness.
No, Nessie. Case closed.
You'd think so, right?
But people are still seeing things in Loch Ness, even today. Why is that? Why do we hold on to these mysteries even when science says, nope, probably not?
That's the real question, isn't it? We're hardwired for this stuff. We crave mystery, and the idea of something unknown, something big, hiding in a loch that's been around since, like, the Ice Age, that's pretty hard to resist.
Yeah, it's like our own little Jurassic Park right here on Earth. But you've spent a lot of time looking into all this. Besides a prehistoric monster, what are some of the, let's say, more realistic explanations for what people might be seeing?
Well, for starters, you got to consider the loch itself. I mean, it's deep, it's murky, full of surprises, really. Ever heard of seiches?
Leeches, not ringing any bells.
So picture a bathtub, right, and how the water sloshes back and forth. A seiche is basically that, but on a much larger scale. It's a standing wave that can happen in a body of water like Loch Ness.
Okay.
And these seiches, they can cause these weird ripples on the surface. They can even mess with sonar readings.
Wait, so what people are picking up on sonar might not even be an object, it could be the water itself acting up.
It happens. It just goes to show you, even our fancy instruments can be fooled. And then, of course, there are the usual suspects, right? Otters, seals, maybe a really big eel.
Okay, yeah, I could see an otter popping its head up, and if you're already expecting Nessie. But what about that whole argument that there's not enough food in Loch Ness to support a giant creature? I mean, it can't be that big, right?
True, it's not the most bountiful environment compared to, say, the ocean, but it's not a dead zone either. There are fish, eels, the occasional salmon making its way through.
So maybe enough to sustain something larger than we realize. Just maybe not, like, Godzilla-sized.
Right. But let's be honest, part of the reason we're so drawn to this mystery is that what if, right? What if it is something totally unexpected, something science hasn't discovered yet? Giant amphibians, weird invertebrates.
Now you're speaking my language. It's fun to think about.
It is. And who are we to say with absolute certainty that there's nothing unusual down there? But without real solid evidence, those ideas stay in the realm of, fun speculation.
And the speculation just keeps on going. Even after all the searches, the sonar scans, even analyzing the DNA in the loch. Speaking of which, what did they find in that 2018 DNA study? Anything monstrous?
Well, a lot of eel DNA, which not a huge surprise, but the amount they found, that was interesting.
So, giant eels.
Possibly. Though DNA can't tell you how big something is, just that it's there, but it definitely adds fuel to the fire, doesn't it?
It's like every new discovery, every study, it's like adding another piece to the puzzle, but we still don't have the whole picture.
And that's the beauty of it, I think. This wasn't just about, is there a monster or not? It's about how we, as humans, deal with the unknown. How we use science, how we use stories to try and make sense of the world.
And sometimes the biggest discoveries aren't about finding all the answers, but about asking the really interesting questions. So what do you think? What's down there? Is a giant eel? A plesiosaur? Something else entirely? Or maybe, just maybe, it's the mystery itself that keeps calling us back to Loch Ness.